Uh... Okay. Uh, okay. Disciples Liberation conquered. Interesting. uh, Not the true ending, I guess. I don't know. I don't know. I'm admittedly extremely confused. Uh, the hard cut there didn't help, but you know, sure, maybe we'll get something after the credits or something like that. But all right, my overall thoughts on Disciples Liberation is I had a great time with this game. Actually, we've been here for almost 80 hours, if not 80 hours, and this is a long freaking game. And I don't think there was ever a point where I found myself bored with the game or exceedingly frustrated or anything like that. Like, I found myself just kind of going with the flow. I think the game kept itself being interesting and the combat was enjoyable. And despite playing this on the hardest difficulty, mind you, I felt like I wasn't encountering walls, significant walls that would normally be associated with higher difficulty playthroughs. So I thought that was neat. I don't always play games at the highest difficulty. So engaging in that every now and then for the right games, it feels good. It feels very good. But yeah, I would say I enjoyed the game a lot. A lot of fun. With all that said, was it satisfying? Heck no. I, there's a lot of things that I want to talk about in this game. Is there even any music? I don't hear anything. There's a lot of things that happen in this game and in like the narrative, and I don't feel like there's an actual cohesive plot that is unfolding. It feels like there are moments, and those moments are pushing us forward. And it's not it's not a narrative that flows into one another, I guess. It just feels like this is very difficult to kind of describe, but like if your goal is to do liberation and then you want to go meet the 4 races, and then after you meet the 4 races, you ally with them, and then you move on to some other path. Like, it didn't really feel like any of that was connected, or any of that moved in a direction that I guess made sense of why we did the previous thing. There's no. We'll just go with that. There's no connection to it, I guess. And so it didn't really feel satisfying at the end, because who cares that the Empire, like, we didn't do anything with the Empire and we screwed them over the whole time. It didn't make any. It wasn't relevant at the end, So yeah. Did it feel complete? I guess it feels complete. It probably stretched out a little longer, but it was fine. Thoughts on the story. Disciples Liberation feels like a sequel taking place after another game, but doesn't remind you what took place in the previous game. I've kind of toyed with this thought. Like, on other games where it would be kind of neat to play a sequel to a game and not have to be reminded about anything that happened previously. If I, let's just say that this was Disciples Liberation 1, it would be kind of cool, maybe, to play Disciples of Liberation 2, and they just assume that you play Disciples of Liberation 1, and so they don't do any recap, any reminders. They expect you to remember everything and kind of get all the context that was necessary to establish relationships in future games. The strange thing about all of that, even though I don't think this is a sequel, is that it just starts off very abrupt, and there's really no explanation or any proper motivations of how the story progresses. And so it feels like it's a sequel to another game that does that, but I think it just doesn't elaborate enough, is all. I'm gonna get this out of here because I don't want to listen. This music is a booming and blasting. Liberation mode is unlocked. You can start a new game and try rallying all factions under your banner. New dialogue choices will be available to help you accomplish this task. Make sure to select these choices to see the new story truly unfold. In addition, you are no longer limited to only 2 companions that can accompany you on the battlefield. You may bring all available companions with you to battle. Wow! That does sound fantastico. But did it save? An auto save right there? No, it did not. So 70 something hours. Steam says 78, but it's not counting right now, but okay. I'm just gonna hit continue and we'll get the regular music here. Or let's go to Ilian. We'll get the Ilian music. If there is music here. Yeah. Let's see. Back on thoughts on the story. We originally set out to gain allies in the other factions, but even after mechanically being allies with those factions with reputation, the story doesn't recognize any alliances that we made, nor do fights with units. So this was a very awkward thing for me because the very beginning of the game is let's go meet all the factions, let's ally with them, and let's liberate Nevendar for some reason. But none of that really matters at all. You know, in the context of the story, it doesn't seem like we get to skip fights with members of those factions because we're allied with them. It doesn't seem like any of the dialogue choices have any tweaks or changes to them because of the alliances. It just feels like a mechanic that has story relevance, but only on the surface of pushing the story forward. And so theoretically, if I just did everything in my power to reduce reputation with as many factions as possible, it may have been possible for me to play this game and just go negative reputation with every faction, and I'd probably get a similar ending. And, you know, who knows, but it certainly feels that way. There are moments where more explanation is required, but is glossed over, like portaling to an ancient city lost in time. This is our home now. This was very, very confusing, and I mean, to this day, I beat the game and I'm still confused. Why did this power just come out of nowhere and portal us out? Okay, that's fine. You know, we learn about that. We're the Nephilim, blah blah blah. But then we just find this angelic city in the middle of nowhere. that we can only portal to, and our first reaction is, we're going to live here. You know, like there's no development on that. Why do you want to live here? There's nothing here. Do you even know if there's any food? We spent, I think it was months or years here after portaling to Ilion, and it's like, where are you getting all your food? You know, where are you getting your supplies? What's going on? So it's just weird stuff like that, where it just says you're doing this, but why are we doing that? It does, you know, that doesn't seem wise, I suppose. Coruscant just witnessed us killing her religious icon. Seems fine. Yeah, we killed the Holy Father, and you know, she was just like, well, dang, you didn't have to do him like that. Meanwhile, her entire religion is being thrown into chaos because of all the crazy stuff that we're learning about the Veil and what they're doing to people, and it just doesn't seem to faze her all that much. She doesn't threaten to leave the party because we did something so catastrophically evil in her eyes. Especially since the only reason she joined our party was to open a door. It's very, very awkward. Seems like the "this is fine" meme. Yeah, pretty much. We pretty much just lit her entire. We basically just lit her entire life on fire. I mean, if you're in a crazy cult that gets power from demons and things like that, but you don't actually know any of that, and they're making abominations of combining people into titans and things like that, I mean, there needed to be more. I wanted more development, I guess. Having killed Mortis, I start questioning the why of the game more. Why are we liberating Nevendar? Why is it important that we're a Nephilim? Why are we getting away with all these shenanigans? There's a void of context of how we got where we are and why we've opted for the path we chose. This is something that I've basically already touched on. It's just, there's a lot of unanswered questions of why we move from point A to point B when there's really no motivation for us to do that. What's the point of liberating Nevendar? Why do we think that we're capable of liberating Nevendar? What about Ilion gives us the impression that we can house hundreds of thousands of people under one nation and rule over the world? I'm just kind of confused by that, because the game doesn't necessarily touch on that. It just glosses over and says, you know, like, this is what the character is doing, which is fine, I guess, but it just makes for a very jarring story, because you're just you're doing hard right angle turns, and it's just like, well, you know, if I'm choosing your dialogue options, but you're still doing whatever you want, you know, what do you want from me? Does Charlea not have a quest for a legendary weapon? Not her ultimate ability quest. I feel like I was extremely thorough but never found one. This is just kind of like a random thought, because I wanted to make sure I wrote that down, but I didn't know where to put that. Yeah, I did everybody's legendary weapon quest, I'm pretty sure. But I never found one for Charlea, and that was kind of weird, because Charlea's pretty good. You know, she's pretty good. Probably would have used, well, maybe not. Edgemar is pretty crazy. Why do we only meet Catanera once prior to the final showdown? I wrote this morning because I have a really big problem with narratives. Maybe not a problem, but, well, usually it is a problem. I like to meet villains And then I like to compound the relationship that we have with those villains with multiple meetings and multiple confrontations that cause us to have or feel a certain way for that particular villain. The only time that we meet Catanera is when she kidnaps the Emperor. And at that moment, it doesn't mean anything yet. You know, like I probably would have killed the Emperor myself. You know, you don't have to frame me for it. Speaking of which, the framing of me for killing the Emperor didn't amount to anything either, as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, I think it would have been cool to confront Catanera on multiple occasions and kind of learn more about why she's doing all these things and what we can do to stop it. And, you know, maybe we thwart a plan over here, but she succeeds in another plan over here. This is where it goes. The way that Catanera's plot develops in this game is one of those situations where it kind of feels like the writer is saying, yeah, this character did this stuff, and they list all these things, and so the character just says, yeah, I did all these things, but we don't get to see any of those things. There were epochs of machinations at work, and we don't kind of get to pick up on those puzzle pieces as we're going on. There's no puzzle pieces to pick up. You know, Catanera just has them all. You know, she put the puzzle together, but it's her puzzle, so she already knows the answer. It's like, you already made that, man. Give it to somebody else. I don't know. It's just weird that whenever games put the final boss or the big bad guy or big bad girl, I guess in this case, and those particular characters just are never present in the story. They have no impact on moving things forward, and it's kind of awkward. There was something else that I wanted to touch on here, but I forget, so we'll move on. Is there even one cohesive narrative playing throughout the game? I wrote this morning as well, because I tried to plot out the plot of the game, and we start off trying to assassinate Sebastian, who later turns into a party member, which is kind of crazy, in a good way. And then we get to Ilion, and we're like, yeah, let's liberate the world. And so we go meet all these factions, and then after meeting those factions, we decide that there's more places that we can go, so we go to more places and we engage in more faction meddling, and then eventually we decide that we want to do other stuff. It's just kind of weird. It gets all muddy right there. And then eventually we uncover Catanera, and it's just like, well, Catanera is going to go do her own thing, so we're just going to walk back into the mud and figure out what we're going to do. I don't think there's a cohesive plot in this game. It's just it just goes where it wants to go. Moving on, the writing. I actually liked the writing for the most part, you know, other than the lack of context or elaboration. A lot of the writing was quite nice in this game. I think one of my favorite parts about it is the quick-witted retorts that a lot of characters have. And I pointed that out a lot of times. Like, some of these characters just say the exact right thing at the exact right moment. And it's so clever, and it's so good, and it's so snappy, and it's just great, you know? It's got some really good retorts. For characters, I didn't really talk to any of the characters outside of the game, like in the castle, which is probably a big mistake on my part. Look at this. Still no white dragon. This game hates me. And I thought about it, but my motivation was kind of, we'll just say, teetering on the evil side of, I kind of wanted to see what this game would do with the characters without me having to go to those characters to get the additional context and stuff like that. I wanted to see how the game would handle those characters and kind of present them as the story went on. And even having beaten the game, I don't necessarily know that talking to those characters would necessarily do anything. Maybe I get some quests from them, but I accomplished most of the quests for people, if not all of them, and didn't really get a lot of additional information, so I don't know. For gameplay mechanics and design, we're gonna be here for a while, folks. This is I got a lot. What gameplay elements stand out? What the heck is the enemy scaling? I go from being over-leveled and crushing it to being 6 or so levels down and having to grind the few fights I hadn't already done. And then it happens again later where there are enemies 4+ levels ahead of me, but the main story was 7 levels below me. I don't know if this was because I'm playing it on the hardest difficulty, but it's pretty crazy to be level 58 or something like that. And then I start seeing level 64 enemies, 65 enemies. And it's like, what the heck is going on here? Where did this come from? And so it's like, all right, well, I guess I gotta go fight these level 60 enemies that I was avoiding. And I finally get up to like level 59 or 60 or whatever, and it's like, okay, maybe I could fight the level 63s. And then I get to a point where it's like, oh yeah, we're going to be throwing some level 58s, 57s at you. And it's like, well, hold on a second. I just had to scrap and claw to get like 2 levels so that I could fight the enemies that you're putting in front of me. And then you're just going to go back to giving me enemies that are supposed to be around the level range that I need to be at? What is going on here? And then to put a level 70 in there, I promise you, if I fought that fight, I would have got absolutely obliterated. It's kind of ridiculous. There's a lack of a help menu that would be really helpful, such as rereading tutorials, looking at information grouped together like status effects or enemy types, building bonuses and units. I don't know if I touch on this later, but you know what? I do touch on this later. But yeah, it would be really nice to just have a menu where I can go through a lot of the mechanics and a lot of what things do and how things work and what I get from certain things, and just have it in one place so that I know what everything does and I know where to find it if I don't know what it does. The local map system is something I've never experienced before. We don't necessarily interact with towns or individuals so much as event triggers, which are represented by objects or character models. It's a neat change of pace. I thought this was actually pretty cool, in that, you know, like most games, they have like a town map and they have NPCs running around and you can talk to them, or maybe you can't talk to them, but there's a lot of interactivity and there's, you know, buildings all over the place and animals and things like that. But in here, it's more of like an overland map, and like kind of like a civilization map, like Civilization 5, for example, but you know, more zoomed in, I guess. And you're just kind of interacting with the various things around you that are like landmarks. And some people represent landmarks or cities or towns or outposts and things like that. And it was kind of cool to experience a different way of conveying that kind of information. So, you know, I thought that was kind of neat. Only having to manage one unit's skills and equipment, for the most part, is an interesting idea. While I enjoy trying to improve each unit, it is cool to provide less of a focus on that. So in this case, Aviana is, the main character that we control, and you can customize her equipment and her spells essentially however you want to go and for whatever path you want. And I thought it was neat that she is essentially the only character that you can do that with. You can equip weapons and I forget what they're called, something shards. I wanted to say emotion. Oh, okay, they are emotion shards. You can equip weapons and emotion shards on companions and emotion shards on units. But, that layer of customizability is dwarfed by Aviana. And so it was kind of cool to just have one super overpoweredly strong character and then have, all these other characters that you basically have to rely on their established stats, so to speak. There's a really nice way to say that, and I was thinking about how to say it, but one character is very complex and other characters are fairly simple, is probably the not as nice way of saying that. But I thought this interpretation, or however this game does this, was kind of cool. Let's see. Equipment as loot feels very unrewarding. It seems very tailored towards strength, which could just be the first half of the game thing, but the stats don't seem to scale, and there are times, as a level 20, I'm getting level 1 stuff. This was a very big problem in this game. I really want to say that 98% of the equipment that I've looted out of chests have probably been worthless. Granted, there's a dismantling system, which is very cool. But I think there's a point where you look at a treasure chest, and if you ever get to the point of saying looting that treasure chest is not worth my time, then you gotta reevaluate what's inside those treasure chests. It's not fun to loot something that you can't use or don't want to use, or is not even worth taking the time to loot the treasure chest, view the item to see if it's good, and then dismantling it for resources. Compile that across the entire game, you probably have several minutes of just time being put into something that wasn't worth the time that you are putting into it. And sure, it's only a few minutes. You probably spent less than 20 minutes looting and dismantling equipment in the game. But that's also 20 minutes of, man, every single treasure chest is so amazing, and man, like this option, I have to actually do some math to figure out if it's going to be better after doing some blacksmith upgrades. You could have the fun theory crafting side, or you could just have that, man, I'm wasting my time. And it just felt like I was wasting my time most of the time. This issue becomes worse when legendary items are introduced. Yeah, so there's when you have a legendary item, you don't really want to get rid of it because it has cool stuff. For example, Ilmarin. Ilmarin has the Wrath of Eros weapon, which is a really good weapon. I'm using 2 other Aranyas, now 3, and that gives them 250 extra HP. 250 extra HP is a lot of HP. So that's incredible. And why would I want to get rid of that? Well, maybe it's because I pick up, some crazy staff of bones. Maybe that's a bad example. Maybe an Inquisitor's longsword that gives my allies 15% additional damage. Well, this is an epic weapon. Why is my legendary weapon getting dwarfed by other weapons when my legendary weapon should theoretically be better, but it's not better? Or maybe it is better and it's making everything that comes after that just worse. You know, this, there's better examples of this. Like, for example, this ancient longsword has 104 power and is definitely more impactful damage-wise than the Wrath of Arrows. You know, sure, it has crit chance and HP on it or whatnot, but you know, I could find a weapon combination that's going to exceed this if there wasn't already one. And I guess there needed to be a way to scale these legendary weapons to be the same amount of impact as a lot of the weapons that I was getting. And I think that's one of the other problems with the equipment in this game, is that once legendary items come into play, you don't want to replace them for a normal weapon, because legendary items have all these unique and special effects to them. And so once Aviana has a legendary item on nearly every slot, that just makes every single equipment piece not worth it. So again, we run into the situation of, well, these treasure chests are not even worth opening anymore. The ability to speed up combat is nice. Yeah, this probably should be in the combat section, but I found this feature quite helpful. I probably could have sped it up even more. I don't know what the cap is on the speed up, but you know, it was a nice little feature to have. I don't like the concept of phasing in and out buildings. It seems unnecessary and pointless. Have all the buildings in one building, or have the map display all possible buildings. So I feel like there's plenty of room here for more buildings to have. Or, you know, you could just have the undead district over here, and it's just one clickable thing. And then you have the demon district, and the empire district, and the elven district. And then you click on those, and then you have 3 separate options. Let me go this with the way. You have 3 separate options of, all right, my empire district has the temple, the barracks, and the Mage Guild. Which one do you want to go into? All right, let me go into the Mage Guild. You go in there, and then you have all the stuff that you can build or train or whatever, and you can recruit your units or whatever, and you plop out of that. Then you can go into the barracks and do all that. It doesn't make any sense to have this phase-in thing, because it costs money, it costs resources, and what if there's other stuff that I want to do here? Such as bigger issues here are when you're trying to choose what to phase in, but there's no valuable information given other than these are the units' portraits of what they produce. A lot of information is needed here, such as what passive bonuses of each building is, and what each unit is capable of doing, as well as how much it costs to train them. Being required to phase in a building to get that information is wasting time and resources. So if I wanted a lich, and I wasn't sure what a lich does, I can't mouse over this lich to see what happens. I have to spend 1,000 money to phase it in, on top of phasing out, you know, the building that I already had in place, just to see what it does. What if I want to optimize the passive bonuses of the buildings that I have? Well, I can't view that information here either. I have to spend the 1,000 money, okay, build it, mouse over all of these, and say, oh man, these bonuses suck. Let me phase this out and look for something else. And I go over here, oh look, the price to phase it in has increased. You know, it's kind of obnoxious. It doesn't need to be this way. And I don't get it. I just don't get it. It I don't get it. The moral mechanic is pretty cool, and I like that it rewards or punishes you for decisions. So this is the let's see. This is this mechanic where you get morale, and when you have morale, it increases like damage and stuff like that. I think something. Anyways, it's oh, here we go. Yeah, morale. I think this mechanic is super cool because you having a character that has a positive or detrimental I guess I want to say attribution, but that's weird. Like I guess disposition to you is kind of cool, and that if they hate you, they're not really as useful, but you know, still useful. But if they like you, and they like you a lot, then you get significantly more out of that unit. And so it's kind of cool to have something like that. However, I do think it drastically hurts party compositions. I essentially couldn't use Empire units at all, despite these units being alien citizens now. So morale is tied to your reputation with that particular faction. To me, it doesn't make much sense to recruit somebody. Let's just say I recruit a priest. Okay, that's not a priest of the Empire anymore. That's a priest of Alien. What does their affiliation with the Empire have anything to do with their morale on this unit? Now this unit is weaker because of my decisions that I made with the Empire, when like they have no claim or hold to the Empire anymore. It just doesn't matter. It might have been cooler to see enemies get buffs rather than allies get debuffs. When I thought of this idea, I was like, holy cow, that is how it needs to go. All right. It would be very, very challenging and actually reward the player for keeping positive reputations with as many factions as possible. Because if the enemies are getting buffs, dealing more damage, having more health, more movement speed, whatever it might be, there's an incentive to maintaining a certain relationship level with that faction to avoid significant combat issues with that faction. The Empire is an extremely annoying faction to fight against because they just have a billion heals all over the place. What if their heals healed more or applied more buffs to the allies that they affected? I might not have approached the Empire reputation the way I did if every single fight was going to be even more of a slog. And I think that would have been a very cool way to kind of avoid this situation, because characters like Coruscant might have been pretty cool. Might have been a very useful character. Can't use her though. She's Empire. How about Sebastian? Yeah, you know, Sebastian could have been pretty cool. You know, he has a cool, really cool ultimate ability. You know, I dig that one. Can't use him. He's Empire. You know, and I was sitting most of the game at -2 morale for the Empire. So what am I gonna do? You know, even if I do New Game Plus, you know, does my reputation stay the same? You know, what happens there? I don't know. I really like the diversity of spells as well as how many there are. It adds another layer of tactics that is made more important when only one character can cast them. The spells in this game are pretty cool. I am confused how you're supposed to get all the spells, because again, I feel like I did the vast majority of this game, but I only unlocked maybe like 85% of the spells, maybe. So I'm kind of curious how this works. Maybe it depends on decisions you make. Not 100% sure, but the spells in this game are really, really cool. And I like that there's a ton of diversity in the spells that I don't know if I ever talk about that, but there's so much diversity. In my spell book, I have a plethora of things here. I have a mass heal that heals everybody and removes all negative conditions. I have something that paralyzes certain units. I have something that can heal me if I'm ever in a pinch and need to do a ton of damage, but also heal myself. I need to blind somebody or just do divine damage because divine damage is supposed to be my highest damage dealing one. Maybe I need to hit people in a 2 hex range, and Eclipse is the way to do it. Also applying some status effects while we're there. Or just Eventide, my bread and butter at the end of the game here when I got this, which is a 3 hex wide, 9 hex long AoE ability that just destroys people and silences them, which makes them effectively somewhat worthless, or resurrect. Started using this a lot. I got this a long time ago, but never really found it to be all that necessary. And then, here we are, be using Resurrect on essentially every challenging fight. Or Full Moon. I just need to buff all my allies, All of these abilities I have used multiple times. And they all have their uses. And on top of that, there's been plenty of abilities that I've used throughout the game to get me to this point, like Twilight Rift. This is so overpowered. It's insane. This carried me for so long. There was the fight against the Guardian, where I used Neutralize for the very first time. And that was really cool. Or actually, no, that was versus a Mortis that I used it first. And I removed the cursed ground, which allowed me to kind of maneuver around a little bit. And then I used it again on the Guardian, which allowed me to reposition my units so that we didn't get bodied by all the AoEs. The spell diversity in this game is great. There are some worthless spells. There are quite a few worthless spells. But at the end of it all, there are some really, really useful spells as well. And so I was very, very happy with just the amount of spells that I had access to and the amount of customization I could actually apply to my character and the fights. Because it's not just a decision of I can cast spells. It's what spell am I going to cast, and how is that spell going to affect the next turns that are upcoming or specific units. It adds so many layers. It's fantastic. You probably get all of them during Liberation mode. Maybe. I really want to say that it just has to do with decisions that you make throughout the story, but, who knows? Let's see. Where did I leave off? Companions are weird. Part of me is disappointed that companions are effectively just reskins of existing units. It would have been nice if they brought more to the table. I also can't put companions in the back line. This was very disappointing to me, actually. Companions don't have any backline abilities. And I guess from a UI standpoint, I can see why that's important. Oh, I guess you two didn't get your requests. I think I understand why. There's just been multiple situations, I guess, where I've had access to these companions, but they just sit over here. And liberation mode seems like it fixes this issue, which is cool. Like being able to use all my companions. It's kind of what I've been asking for quite some time. So a small part of me kind of wants to, play the game again and see what all the new choices are and play with all my companions and just have a ton of fun, There's no cost on them. So presumably I could just put them all in here and just go ham, that would be pretty cool. Let's see. You can only have 2 of them, which is infinitely less interesting, especially when factoring in party compositions. They really aren't even that much stronger than other units since they can still be 2-shot. So this could be a difficulty thing. Again, I played it on Brutal, which is the hardest difficulty. And there are characters that are just, getting popped. And pretty much every companion gets popped. Edgemar, he gets 2-shot all the time. He has almost 2,000 HP. And he just gets popped all the time. The possibilities of adding more companions just makes my mind think of what it could be. And when I think about these units, they're just not that much better. I would say the only distinctions are they can equip weapons, sure, whatever, blah. But they also have 2 gold AP instead of, like a red and a blue, or a gold and a red, or a gold and a blue, whatever it may be. But a lot of these units are tier 4 units anyways. Or Muriel, the unit that she's based off of, has 2 gold AP. Orion's unit, I think, also has 2 gold AP. Charlea's a vampire who has 2 gold AP. So it's kind of it kind of just makes it so that, okay, you can equip weapons, but are weapons really that much of a deciding factor? What is this little thing right there? Oh, that's that. So I think this game would have been more interesting if you could just use all your companions. Because then, you have more banter, more other interactions that can be achieved from that. Even though this was primarily just a combat limitation and not necessarily a writing or a narrative limitation. Let's see. For the most part, I like what was done with the skill tree. This tree. That I never got to finish this out. The bonuses felt impactful and worth putting points into. I think this one is probably self-explanatory, and I don't think I need to say it more than I already have, but I would say that most of the stuff, if not all of the stuff that I put points into, it was worth it spending a point there. This teamwork ability, I've relied on this for so long in the game. Commander's Presence, I saw this and decided to put all of my effort into going into this tree because I wanted to see how this worked. There's things like getting incorporeal in battle and seeing if that works with Commander's Presence. There's so many little things that work well in these trees. And then on top of that, you get these little bonuses down here for putting points in the trees. So it's like you're doubling up on stuff. This Twilight Pulse is insane. this twin cast would have been more insane. You know, I probably in hindsight, this is probably the way to go, and then just put, you know, like whatever here. But it's really, really cool, regardless, to actually have value in the points that you're putting things into. Not all games do that. You know, when I first started the game in this combat tree, I didn't really like anything in this tree that I could put points into. But as the game went on, and I got access to the CRS class or other options for classes, then I started to see the potential in the other trees and not so much this tree. But, you know, maybe the Warlord class or the Hexblade or whatever, you know, maybe they can leverage this tree to be the bomb diggity. I don't know. Let's see. I wish the combat tree wasn't effectively useless for half of the classes. So I'm guessing this is a problem with all of them. So if I were to reassign my skills, and then I chose, oh, these are no. Anyways, let's say I chose the Dawn Lord. Okay, I'm guessing primarily the other tree that I have access to is going to be mostly locked out. Yeah. So I don't necessarily like this approach. I think it would have been more interesting to kind of work with the combinations of them. Sure, it could be pretty overpowered, but it doesn't, it's not, is it really that much of a problem? If I'm over here building strength, what does it matter if I'm casting tier 4 spells? You know, those tier 4 spells are not going to do any damage. I'm basically just using them to apply status effects or just do whatever little damage that I can do. So there's definitely value in pursuing this stuff sometimes. And, you know, just let the player experiment where they want. You know, it's always a better choice in my opinion. I think it would have been more interesting to rework requirements. Instead of requiring Dusk Witch for certain skills, maybe the bonus is doubled for that class, or an additional effect is added. Instead of faction skills requiring reputation, have their bonuses be in effect when you reach that reputation level, forcing you to maintain your standing, not just achieve it. So this kind of moves back into the morale mechanic a little bit, where it would be nice to have the reputation of the game mean a little bit more, which I think my next point is about reputation. But for skills that require you to maintain reputation, it makes a whole other mechanic that doesn't really mean anything in this game to mean something more. May not mean all that much, but if I want Bethrazin's Boon, which gives my my Legion units more power, and I have to maintain a revered reputation with the Legions to keep that, I'm going to want to keep that. And it makes story choices now influenced by mechanical choices and kind of vice versa, which makes choice have impact, you know? Makes you want to keep alliances or keep hurting other factions so that other choices matter. It just seems like a no-brainer to me. Let's see. The reputation system is not my favorite. I like that achieving friendly and honored is pretty quick, but revered takes a lot more investment. The benefits aren't necessarily worth double or more the investment, and in some cases are completely worthless. So the bonuses for achieving revered are essentially these tier 3 faction ones, which you might not even, be putting points into, depending on where you are or who you are, class-wise, yada, yada. But on top of that, it doesn't make any sense to get like these unique armors as well, which, they're nice, they're great, they have different looks on them and whatnot, and that's cool. But are they worth getting to that reputation level? Personally, I don't think so. Once achieving revered, any negative reputation puts you back at honored. This is extremely obnoxious. There was a moment where I was saving a skill point to put in Betherzen's Boon 3, and I was just waiting for me to hit honored. And at one point, I forgot about it. Maybe I put the point somewhere else and forgot about it as well. But I lost revered, and it took some time to get it back because there was no more demon quests to do. There's no padding for the reputation. It's you reach 100% and you get there, but if you ever get to 99% or 99 points, you're honored again. And so that system, just let me go to 150, 200 or something like that. Let me go off the scale so that I can still make poor decisions with that faction and still be negatively impacted by those decisions because my reputation is going down, but I'm not immediately just thrown into the trenches. Some quests just give you negative reputation, even if you help them out. So this one blows my mind. Where I think it was the demons. I helped out the demons, and they were just like, that wasn't what we wanted. So we're giving you negative, like, what was it, 15, 10 reputation or something like that. It's also story quests where the story quest like blurb says choose this or this, and then you go into the quest and you don't get a choice. You just have to do one of those things that's pre-chosen for you. Don't know if that's influenced by the choices you make during the story or whatever, but it didn't seem to make much sense to me. So not a big fan of the reputation system and kind of the things that revolve around it. I think it could have been a little bit more interesting, in my opinion. I like the breakdown of where you can get the stats from when you mouse over them on the character screen. This is so cool. This is so cool. I love that I can go over here and be like, oh man, my unholy resistance is really lacking here. Let me put some stuff on there. And then I put a bunch of stuff on there. And then it's like, oh, okay. I'm now up to max. If I were to reload, I was at max before, or critical chance. There you go. I'm probably a few percent over, but I can see where I'm putting too many points into it, and I can start pulling points out here and there from equipment or skill choices, whatever it may be, and kind of redo things. It's cool. I like this, and then you can go over here, you can see what stuff does and how it affects other things. Very, very cool. I dig it a lot. The resource system is certainly curious. Producing resources per hour seems like a questionable route to go. On one hand, I effectively have unlimited resources because I can just leave the game running and check in every hour. On the other hand, is that even fun? Same applies for the marketplace. Yeah, I don't know why they did this. it's interesting. It certainly invokes a mobile game structure, I suppose. And if you were to look at this game from the lens of a mobile game, you can definitely see some first word that came to mind was comparisons, but not really where I wanted to go with it. You can see where some elements of this game might be comparable to elements that are in mobile games. And you know, it's not necessarily to say that this is a mobile game, but it's more to say that there seems to be some influence from the mobile game department that kind of goes this. Now, I don't think there's any microtransactions or anything like that, but it's just kind of weird to have a time limit on acquiring resources. In this way, it kind of throws out balance in some ways. If you have infinite resources, infinite resources, what is the point or the value of having resources at all? So it's interesting. It's very, very interesting. Bosses struggle from an age-old problem in Dungeons and Dragons: the action economy. None of the bosses in this game were challenging to me, but they certainly did have a ton of health, and it certainly took a really long time to kill them. But the problem isn't necessarily those two things, even though those are issues. It's that the bosses weren't really all that threatening. Even at the highest difficulty, I was slapping up the bosses. The hardest boss for me was probably the very first boss, because it implemented a mechanic that I was ignoring, and I didn't know that I was ignoring it until like the very end of the fight. He would put up these pillars, and then like one or two turns later, he would do this big ol' AoE to the entire field. But if you have units standing behind pillars, they wouldn't get hit with that AoE. So it was a really cool kind of mechanic, but I ignored it and I beat the boss anyways. I did lose quite a few units for doing that, but there's something missing there. In Dungeons and Dragons, when you have this problem, it's because your bosses are not attacking enough. It has nothing necessarily to do with the damage they're doing or the HP they have. It's that they need to attack more. They need to have 2 turns per round, or 3 turns per round, or special passive effects that happened in the round in addition to their turns. They need to have a higher action economy to compete with the players that they're up against. Because, if you have 4 players and they're all doing 3 attacks per round, and your boss is only attacking once per round, you can see how the economy there is so heavily in the player's favor. And I think this applies to this game as well. Reducing the boss HP and giving the bosses more actions would significantly empower the bosses to be stronger, but also make the bosses more memorable. Because, spending 30 minutes to 45 minutes fighting these bosses when they're essentially doing the same thing every, 2 or 3 turns, it's not great. It's not great. All right, for combat. Still gonna be here for a while. Terrain features are pretty obnoxious, and I wish there was interaction with them, such as creating or destroying them. I feel like this was a missed opportunity. Anytime you have any sort of terrain features in a tactics game, I think my first thought about them is, oh man, it would be really cool if I could destroy those. It would just be neat because the terrain features in this game are pretty obnoxious. You can't shoot ranged attacks over them. You can do spells over them, but certain like line spells and things like that, they get blocked by them. I would say at least 50%, and I think I'm being very, very, very generous on the player side here. It should probably be like 80 to 90%, but at least 50% of the fights, the positioning of the terrain things are to the benefit of the enemies that I'm fighting, to prevent like ranged attacks or getting one hit killed by me, what have you. So I wish there was a better way to do that, or more interesting way. You know, a little bit more customization, I suppose. Ranged units can't shoot past enemies in front of them, and it's silly. So I was confused by this for the longest time in this game, and it finally dawned on me, maybe like halfway through, 60% of the way through the game, that enemies in front of me affect my cone of attack, and it's not explained in this game why that is, but it certainly would be more interesting to me if you just point blank shot the enemy in front of you if you targeted something, you know, behind it. I guess there's some merit to, you know, if someone's engaged with you in melee, you know, like, can you really shoot that bow? I don't know. But it was annoying. Plus the Arañas, they fly, so. Bugafoo. The ability to set waypoints for moving would be greatly appreciated. The default movement sometimes takes the worst possible paths to do stuff. Yeah. The movement, I would say the majority of the time, the vast majority of the time, the movement is fine. But there are just those edge cases where there's an example where I had an Abyssal Devil, and he could move forward to attack somebody, but there was a power orb or something like that right on the path below, but he would automatically take the top path no matter what. And it didn't make any sense because there's a benefit right there. You would think the pathing would default to the benefit if it's there, but I don't think the pathing can read that information. So if I was able to set a waypoint, I could force the Abyssal Devil to go there. Or that one time where there was fire and poison on the ground, and I wanted to go north to attack somebody, but my ally wanted to go through 2 ticks of fire and 2 ticks of poison instead of just 3 ticks of poison to get to the same destination. You know, it's a little silly. Let's see. Starting the battle with enemies on both sides of the map with my army in the center are not fun. I never got to flank anything. Not that I would want to. Yeah. I don't necessarily mind that there are some situations where the dynamic of the battle is different. It changes. But flank attacks in most situations, there were a few situations where it didn't make sense, you know, it was conveyed in the narrative, but in most situations, they did not make any sense. I would run up on two armies fighting each other, and then I'd be like, sup? And then we fight, and then all of a sudden I'm in the middle of them. It's like, no, I ran up on them. They're in front of me. All right. You know, like, boom. Plus, like, the enemies never fight each other or anything like that. Even though they're enemies, it's that made things kind of weird too. Let's see. Waiting in combat reduces cooldown timers by 1. This was unexpected, and honestly, it's kind of strong because waiting is the name of the game in this game. You know, it is disciples waiting liberation. It's kind of obnoxious. I don't even know if I talk about this, but the power of the wait command is insane, and the value of initiative, in my opinion, is not good. Like, having more initiative in most cases is not great, because in this game it's far more impactful to move second on the first turn. If all the enemies moved on the first turn, and then you got to capitalize on their clumping up, you would win every single fight. And that's how I won a majority of fights, was being able to wait. I think what would be a really strong way to play this game is if there's like a spell that gives you initiative or something like that, you equip the least amount of initiative you can on people, and you just wait. And at the end of that first turn, you cast a spell that increases initiative, and then you start first on all subsequent turns, and you just win everything, because the first turn means a lot in this game. If you're put on the defensive on the first turn, you're probably going to lose. If you start crushing them on the first turn, then you're probably going to win. It's just it's how it is. Let me see. It would have been nice to have a way to attack the backline units to disable the benefits. This is something that I actually really wish was there. Maybe not kill them, but disable them. There are some backline abilities that are just super obnoxious, and I think it would offer a little bit more diversity in the combat of having units sneak past other units to do backline damage, so to speak. It would allow for another type of strategy where it's not kill all the enemies, it's prevent them from getting to our back line, because our back line is what's doing the most for us. And it would just be a nice little diversified strategy for the game, and I think that would be pretty cool. Enemy ranged characters seem very tanky for how much damage and utility they bring. So this is specifically targeted at the Empire Priests. They have so much HP, and they do so much damage, and they heal for so much. I believe there was a situation where there was a priest on the backline and two priests on the field, and I had, I think, like 3 or 4 enemies or something like that, and I wasn't doing enough damage. I don't know if I restarted that battle or if I ended up getting it, but it was so obnoxious to go up against that and really have no tools to combat it. You would think that if you're a lower tier unit and you're also a ranged unit, you would be significantly squishier than a unit that is not really in that same position. That's not really the case. Not really. We'll get more to that a little bit later. To kind of compound on this, some units seem a little too strong in comparison to others. Shadowcaster is very weak compared to the Initiate. The former heals and attacks weakly in a line. The latter heals and attacks with ranged AoE that debuffs. So the Initiate has a like range 5 AoE. So like 7 hex damage or whatever, and it applies weakened, which reduces their damage by 15%. You know, that's pretty strong. They also have a heal that heals. Then you have a Shadowcaster who just attacks in a line and does like no damage. And then they also have a heal. The usefulness of those two enemies or units are night and day. The Initiate is so good, and the Shadowcaster is so bad, unbelievably bad. And then you have Priestesses that are insane, or Arinyas that are insane. Priestesses who can cast Chain Heal and attack people from range and all this other junk have these backline abilities that heal people and I think apply regen, maybe. Or Arinyas, which we got to see the strength of them for basically ever since I got them, because they heal things when they do damage. They do, I think it's like 25% or 30% of their damage is applied to a range 2 AoE around them. And that was exacerbated by Aviana having a passive ability that made it so that she gets 50% more healing. So that meant that all of my allies got 50% more healing. So it turned out to be getting way more healing from the Arinyas than I'm supposed to get. And since I had 3 of them, counting my Ilmarin, who can attack twice, you can see how I positioned myself to a point of defensiveness, but also a little bit of offensiveness, where a lot of my units became unkillable because the damage they were taking was just getting negated by other units, where normally you would have to rely on Aviana to redo that or get rid of that damage, but instead Aviana was able to stay on the offensive. And that's probably the biggest breaking point for me is in the very beginning of the game, I was relying heavily on Aviana to pick up for my mistakes or for the enemy's advantages. But in this case, Aviana was just crushing things and my Arinyas were doing that. So it was very, very strong. Did I already finish the game? I have. I'm going through my thoughts at the moment. We got a long way to go. I think we're not even halfway through combat. And then some, if not all, tier 4 units seem very weak, like the Ice Giant and Abomination, despite some great status effects or utility. So I think the Abomination probably just didn't do as much damage because of the morale thing, but I also gave the Titan rather. The Titan, I gave them the +3 morale thing, so they had 2 morale total. So I feel like they should have been doing more damage. But for whatever reason, it's like, yeah, I'm just going to do like 400 damage, 300 damage. It's like, hold on a second. You're this gigantic abomination made of like the body parts of all these other people, and you're throwing these gargantuan rocks, which take forever, mind you. You know, they could speed up the animation speed. So, how long does it take for those things to hit you on a slower combat speed? Yikes. But anyways, they just weren't doing any damage. These are tier 4 units that are not hitting very hard. And, you know, on the flip side, the enemies are hitting me for like 800 damage, chunking me. It's insane. So, I think there's a lot of disparity there with some of the units. I would honestly probably say that every single tier 4 unit is not very good. I still never got a white dragon, by the way. But the Archmage, not very good. Titan, not very good. Ice Giant, not very good. Elven Dragon, not very good. That's the, like, Fire Dancer or whatever. Not very good. Draco Lich, not very good. Lich, not very good. Vampires, not very good. Overlords, I think those guys are. Those guys are actually quite interesting. I think the ability to have a Aura 2 taunt when you end your turn is probably good enough to say that these units are fairly good. Overseers, underwhelming, probably kind of good, but underwhelming. They only have 3 movement. The range is like 4 on their main ability. The Magma Dragon is probably the best. It has a pretty decent normal attack that applies 2 status effects, I believe. And then its Fire Breath is pretty decent. And then it has a Aura 2 deal damage, which is always useful. So, yeah, like all of that is pretty underwhelming in my opinion. So, yeah. Will I play Liberation Mode? I will say the chances of that happening are not very high, but it's not ruled out for me. I'm certainly very curious, but this game also took me like 80 hours to play. So, if it does happen, it would probably be something much later down the line. I have so many games to play, and replaying games that I've already beaten is not high up in today's day and age. But I'm not ruling it out. Not ruling it out. I'm certainly very curious. Let's see. Keep on keeping on. Kind of annoying that the default for the UI is to... default for the enemy AI is to wait if they can't attack you that turn. Wish there was some variation between the races or units. Yeah. So this was kind of annoying for me, and something that I noticed pretty early on as well, within like the first 30% of the game, is that there's no variation in how the enemies approach you. And I don't know if I talk about this, but I might talk about this later. I do talk about this later. So yeah, I'll just leave it at, you know, I wish waiting was, maybe there was some sort of detriment to it or something like that. Maybe you got less initiative on the next turn. Something that would make it so that the very first turn is not just waiting, because that was mostly what it turned out to be, until I became, you know, an overpowered super soldier of spells, to which I was still waiting. I wish the movement indicator was a different color. All spaces a unit can move is highlighted in blue. The line of travel is indicated by those hexes having a blue hexagon inside the normal blue hexagon's borders. It's hard to immediately identify what path your character is taking, especially if there are field effects. The Mana Storm one made this very difficult. There's some situations where like fire's on the ground and stuff like that. If the movement was a different color, that would be helpful. Or if the the hexagon ring, I'll just call it. No, it's not a ring, but ring. If that was a different color, just something to better identify where your movement is going so that you can actually spot those situations where, hey, my character wants the default moving through 4 tiles of fire and some poison when I can actually just go around that and avoid that entirely. Waypoints would also help with that. The field global effects of fights are pretty cool. Nice bit of variety. There were some really cool ones. The ones where you have to move around or else you take damage and you get slowed and then eventually you get immobilized. That really changes up how I want to play that fight. It makes certain companions and certain units less useful because they have to move around a lot. And it makes the fight a little bit more challenging because there's this extra layer in the fight, and that was super cool to run with. Some of them are less enjoyable for me than others, but mostly because I was running like 3 or 4 areas, like the Mana Storm, where hovering units take damage on the beginning of the turn, and when they move, that one was a little obnoxious. The Mana Geysers weren't really all too much that interesting, but an added layer of something. Apparently they block ranged attacks though, which is not good. There was the lightning strikes. There was the undead one where they have a chance to spread like this plague, and if a unit with the plague dies, they get risen as a zombie or something like that. These little field effects were very, very cool to encounter, and it would have been even cooler to have fights with those field effects, and those fights were specifically designed to either take advantage or leverage those field effects to make them, really special fights. You have a Mana Storm that is well, I'm not going to give any examples because I'm horrible at examples, but you get where I'm going with that. Let's see. I do wish enemy compositions were more interesting. There's only been one fight where 2 races were mixed together. This was written very early on in the game. 2 races. There's only been one fight where 2 races are mixed together, which was in the pits. And I think there could be more of that, or more handcrafted ones, where a certain strategy that isn't rush the enemy with melee, snipe with ranged. So I think this has to do with something that I will talk about a little bit later, but the enemy compositions, I don't think there's a specific AI built to each individual unit so that they act differently based off of what unit they are. If I have an Arañez, that Arañez is, or if the enemy has an Arañez, they're probably not going to position themselves so that when they attack, they heal units that are right next to them. They're probably just going to move forward and cast their effect. You have a healing unit. Healing unit's probably going to heal something if it's low enough, and if not, it's probably going to attack something, or if it can't attack anything, it'll probably just wait or just move. Pretty much all of the units on the enemy side act the same, and it would be neat. A lot of work, but neat and cool and fun, and add a ton of diversity if each unit behaved differently. And since they don't do that in this game, it is just kind of, well, let me just have the enemy rush at me because that's what they're going to do. And they're going to take advantage of their spells because I'm going to clump up because I failed at the waiting game for the very first turn. The concept of ultimate abilities is neat, but I don't think the execution is something I like. In most battles, you will have a pretty good idea if you're winning a fight 6 turns in, and if you are, the ultimate isn't needed, while if you aren't, the ultimate won't help you. So this kind of goes back to the waiting game for me. Turn 1, I feel, is the turn that you're going to know if you're going to win the fight or you're going to lose the fight. There are certainly other factors that will influence things after the first turn, but if you're on turn 6 and you now have your ultimate ability, if you're losing, it's not going to help, because you can only do the ultimate ability. You can't move and then do the ultimate ability. So chances are you're not in a position to leverage that. On top of that, if there's only 2 enemies left, why would you use an ultimate ability? If you only have 2 units left and there's like 6 other units, your ultimate ability is not going to kill them, and you're still going to die. But maybe you'll do some damage or something like that. I don't know. The strength of the ultimate abilities don't seem good enough to lock out your entire turn. And the time it takes to get an ultimate ability is much too influenced by the turns prior to it that it's probably not going to be useful by the time you get access to it. So it doesn't give ultimate abilities a good leg to stand on. And then I have here the asking price might cost too much as well. I think if they let you move, I would be fine with it. New selection, still no white dragon. This game still hates me. All right, this is the last point with some sub points, but this one's gonna sound crazy. I think the combat loses the spark that makes it fun once compositions open up. It's primarily because it's less about building a diverse and effective squadron, but more about optimizing to survive. This could be tied to difficulty, but I can't build goofy compositions with cool synergy, such as all necromancers, banshees, or werewolves. Just can't happen. Part of this is because lower tier units take more damage and deal less damage than higher tier units. Lower tier units also have less disruptive elements, such as useful skills, passive effects, or debuffs. Essentially, I feel the game wants your composition to primarily be tier 4 units with some tier 3 sprinkled in, then when instead encouraging diversity in what lower tier units can do with some higher tier ones sprinkled in. Assigning limits, like what is done with companions, may be a possible route. So I feel like that was elaborate enough for where I wanted to go with that. So I'll just leave it at that. For dungeons, I don't really have anything to say about dungeons, both positive or negative. You know, they were dungeons. I went through them. I bodied fools. I got bodied. Stuff happened. For Cardinal Sins, here's something that I wasn't expecting. But when I was going through my list of Cardinal Sins, I was like, this was interesting. Removing key party members without sufficient replacement. Edgemar and Charlea were removed from the party towards the end there, right before we fought, or right after we fought the Council of Six, and that was curious. Granted, we did get Edgemar back. It's not as big of a cardinal sin as it is in other games, but you know, it was still there, and it happened to other party members as well. Backup party learns less experience. So this one is a fascinating one, because sure, it's a cardinal sin, but like, is it really a cardinal sin? Because you can level them up without grinding, air quotes, which is cool. It costs money, but it's cheap. So if I really wanted to, I'd be like, oh man, Nomi is really low level. Let me just level her up real quick, and then boom, she's leveled up, and it hardly cost me anything. I think that's cool. Really nice way to navigate the issue of I want to use another character, or I have to use another character because of the companion side quest, but they're so low level that I'm screwed over. You now have a way to navigate that, and you have that for every single unit that's possible. That's very, very cool. Still Cardinal Sin though. Just level them all at the same time. You're gonna say, when you're finally done being a disciple, table flip? Oh my gosh. For miscellaneous, sound, music. I think the music, there's some really nice tracks. There's this one, I want to say it's an elven music because I heard it the most when it was elven enemies on the field, but I don't think it was an elven music. But it was like kind of upbeat, and some string instruments going on. It was very, very nice. I like that one a lot. But yeah, I think the music in this game is fairly nice. For voice acting, seems like the main story and companion side quests are voice acted. I always say, if you're going to put voice acting in a game, the bare minimum is you voice act the main story. And if you want to do more than that, that's great. If you don't want to put voice acting in your game, that's great. But don't just sprinkle in voice acting wherever you want to, because it's just so jarring and it doesn't make any sense. There's too many games out there where there's no voice acting during a conversation, and then one line is voice acted, and then they go back to no voice acting. It's a mess. So I'm glad that this game took the approach of we're going to voice act the entire main story, except for the narrator parts. And there you go. I was pleased. For graphics, I think the graphics of this game are actually pretty nice. I think it was Mana Dryad a couple of days ago saying that the spell effects and things like that were cool, and I think they are cool. Shooting these big old spells across the field and blowing things up and seeing enemies explode and gore all over the place, or they when they die from fire damage, they kind of like burn up and turn to ash, or if they're ice, they get all icically and kind of like shatter or something like that. It's cool. It's cool. They did a really good job with that. Replay value. Does the game offer additional story content in a second playthrough to warrant playing the game again, such as Fire Emblem Three Houses, for example? So, this one is interesting because it looks like it does. Liberation mode seems like it gives you additional options, and there's some sort of other path or other timeline that you can go across. I'm sure the majority of the game is probably more or less the same, but there's new decisions that you can make which might create new opportunities, and suddenly you're on a different path of story. And what they're alluding to before is that basically the High Father needs to be summoned, which kind of changes the outcome of the game. So I think there is some replay value in this one. Is the game worth recommending? I would say this game is worth recommending. I would certainly recommend this game. I enjoyed it enough. I do think it's too long. I don't think it needs to be 80 hours or even 40 hours. I think this game could be 25, 30 hours and be totally fine. Granted, a lot of that time is combat oriented, and you probably have to tack on 15, 20 hours for brutal difficulty. But at the same time, I don't really feel like I was burdened by the brutal difficulty all too much. But yeah, I would recommend it. Would I play it again, whether immediately, near future, or distant future? So I added these two questions for future things, and I'm noticing a problem with this one, and it's that, you know, like I have so many games to play. When will I go back to games that I've already beaten that offer new things? Will I ever go back to Fire Emblem Three Houses to play the Black Eagles and the Golden Deer? Maybe, but probably not, just because there's other games that I would want to play. So there's kind of a flaw in this question, but I will say, having said all of that, that yeah, I would play this to see what else is offered by the game and what changes based off of other decisions that I'm going to make, and how this liberation mode actually affects the end of the game. And maybe we fight the High Father or something like that, and maybe he destroys the world, That's some crazy stuff. Some crazy stuff. Okay. If the developer is watching, so I essentially started this off by being very, very confused by the ending of this game. But ultimately saying this game was a ton of fun and I enjoyed playing it, and then, I don't necessarily regret my experience in any regard. And then I just went on to explain a bunch of things that I would like to see improved, or I didn't necessarily like, or maybe their implementation just wasn't something that I agreed with. And I think that would definitely color an interpretation of this game as fairly negative, but I do like the game a lot. I wouldn't play 80 hours of this game if I didn't like it. I think that's something that's not really conveyed a lot, is that the longer you play a game, there's really no reason to keep playing it if you're still playing it. There's no sunken cost fallacy when it comes to these things. It's either you play it and you hate it and you put it down, or you play it and you like it and you keep going, or you're just ambivalent and you just keep going to see if you're going to like it eventually. There are edge cases, of course, Pokemon Mystery Dungeon, Explorers of the Sky. But I would definitely say that I enjoyed playing this game despite my many criticisms of it. It was a ton of fun, and I enjoyed myself with it. I do think the game is too long. I don't think it needs to be 80 hours. I do think that there are a lot of improvements that could make this game even better, some of which I might have touched on. But I do want to say that I don't think that should discourage from the actual quality of the game, which is actually quite high. I think the writing is great. I think the story is there. It needs improvements, in my opinion. I think the combat is great. I think there's a lot of customizability there. I like a lot of the central aspects of the game, and a lot of the things that I don't like, I'm willing to put up with, as I have done. So I think you made a great game, and I would play the sequel. The sole draw for me playing this game is there was a demo on the Steam Next Fest, or E3 demo, or something like that. And I played like 45 minutes to an hour and a half of this game. And I said, you know what? I've seen enough. I'm going to play this game. And and I'm done. And here we are, having beaten the game. And I will play the sequel, and I will play the demo of the sequel if there is one, maybe, and I'll just have a great time. I might have to keep an eye on the Disciples franchise. I'm sure that the other games in the series or franchise are not anything like this, but this game has piqued my curiosity for what the other games are. So, yeah, thanks for the game. I had fun playing with it, and I look forward to what the future holds. That's going to wrap it up for my thoughts. Yeah.